The old man in handcuffs would not look away from her. Not at the judge. Not at the prosecutor stacking his death sentence page by page. Only at Naomi Johnson, the abandoned girl he had carried home from a Seoul welfare office 15 years ago, now 23, standing at the defense table with his life in her shaking hands. "Does the defense have counsel prepared to proceed?" the judge asked. Naomi's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Seo Jung-ho, the man half of Seoul whispered about, the chairman prosecutors feared for 40 years, refused every lawyer his money could buy, everyone but her, the daughter he never adopted on paper, the daughter he never explained. "Why me?" she had begged him through the glass. "You will die if I lose." He only said, "Then do not lose." Now the courtroom waited. In a locked drawer in his study sat a photograph he had kept face down for 15 years. A woman with Naomi's exact eyes, and the truth inside it was about to burn everything down. Welcome to AfroKorean Romance Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment below where you are watching from and what time it is over there. If stories like this make your heart race, I have something special for you. The ultimate Mafia Boss Love Collection brings together 15 unforgettable Afro-Korean romance stories, 20 audiobook versions, and 5 exclusive bonus stories, not available on YouTube, but only through the collection. Click the link below if you'd like hours of romance waiting for you anytime. Now, let's get into today's story. There were 3 questions hanging over that courtroom, and by the end of this story you will have the answer to every one of them. The first, why would a man who could buy any defense in the country, a man whose name alone could make a witness forget what he saw, refuse every seasoned lawyer in Seoul and stake his life on a 23-year-old who had never once tried a murder case? The second, what was Seo Jung-ho actually guilty of? Because the strange thing, the thing that kept Naomi awake at night, was that he never behaved like an innocent man. He behaved like a man guilty of something else, something older, something he would rather die in a cell than say out loud. And the third, the question Naomi did not yet know to ask. In a drawer in his study, locked for 15 years, there was a photograph he kept turned face down. A woman, young, laughing at whoever held the camera, and she had Naomi's exact eyes. To understand any of it, you have to go all the way back. Back to the winter the girl arrived in a country that had no idea what to do with her. Back to the night nobody wanted her. It was the coldest week of that year, and the welfare office on the edge of the city smelled of instant coffee and wet coats. Naomi Johnson was 8 years old, and she had been sitting on the same plastic chair since morning. Her feet did not reach the floor. On her lap, she held a paper shopping bag, and inside that bag was everything she owned in the world. 2 shirts, a pair of socks, and a paperback of English fairy tales her mother used to read from at night, its spine soft as cloth from being opened so many times. She did not cry. That was the thing the social workers kept mentioning to one another in low voices, as if it worried them more than tears would have. 8 years old, brown-skinned in a room full of pale faces, mother gone, father a name on no document anywhere, and the child simply sat and watched the door and waited. Her mother, Diane Johnson, had come to Korea from New York, from Harlem, chasing a man and a fresh start, and a version of her life that had never quite arrived. That much the file recorded. What the file said next was one flat sentence that would shape everything. The mother had left the country and had not returned for the child. Left her. Those were the words on the page, and Naomi, who read Korean slowly but read it, had seen them upside down across a caseworker's desk. Left her. At 8 years old, she had learned the lesson that would follow her into every room she ever entered for the rest of her life. That love was not a thing you were given, but a thing you were loaned. And that one day, without warning, it would be called back in. The caseworkers had made their calls. 3 foster families had been contacted about the girl in the paper bag coat. 3 families had, in the careful language of such places, expressed reservations. They did not say why out loud. They did not have to. In that city, in that year, a child who looked like Naomi was a question no one wanted to be asked in front of the neighbors. So she waited. And the sky outside went from white to gray to the deep blue of a Seoul winter evening. And one by one the desks emptied, until there was only a single tired woman left, filling out the form that would send Naomi to the group facility across the river, the place the older children called the last stop, because from there, nobody got chosen. And then the door opened. She felt the cold come in before she saw him. The last caseworker rose so fast her chair scraped the floor. 2 men stood in the doorway in dark suits, and between them, unhurried, came a third, an older man in a long charcoal overcoat, snow still melting on the shoulders, a man who did not walk into rooms so much as let the room rearrange itself around him. Naomi had never seen him before, but the caseworker had. Everyone in Seoul, it turned out, had heard the name even if they had never dared say it. And the woman's face had gone the specific pale of a person who has just realized which storm has walked through her door. The old man did not look at the caseworker. He did not look at the suits. He crossed the room slowly, and he stopped in front of a plastic chair that held an 8-year-old girl clutching a shopping bag, and he looked down at her for a long, long moment, the way you look at something you have been searching for. "What is your name?" he asked her, in Korean. "Naomi," she said. And then, because her mother had taught her that a person should always give their whole self when asked, she added her mother's private name for her, Nayeli. Something moved across the old man's face and was gone before she could name it. He straightened. He turned to the caseworker, who was still standing, still pale, still holding a pen she had forgotten she was holding. "She comes with me," he said. 4 words. No explanation. No paperwork that made sense of it. Not that night, and not for 15 years after. The caseworker began to stammer something about process, about approvals, about the way these things were done, and the old man simply looked at her, and whatever she saw in that look, she stopped talking and reached for a different form. And here is what nobody in that office understood, and what Naomi herself would not understand until she was grown, until it was almost too late, that the most feared man in the city had not come to that office by accident. He had come looking. He had known there was a girl there before he ever climbed the stairs, and the reason why was the one thing he would carry to the edge of his grave rather than let her carry it herself. But the girl did not know any of that. The girl only knew that a stranger in a warm coat had said 4 words no one had said to her in a very long time. "She comes with me," and that for the first time since her mother vanished, someone in the world had chosen to walk toward her instead of away. The house he took her to sat high on a hillside in Seongbuk-dong, behind walls taller than any she had ever seen, in the kind of quiet that money buys. Men bowed to him at the gate. Men bowed to him in the garden. For the first few weeks, Naomi kept the paper bag beside her bed, packed and ready, because in her experience, homes were temporary, and the smart thing was to be prepared to leave before you were made to. Seo Jung-ho never made her leave. He also, in those early days, never quite explained why she was there. He was not a warm man in the way of storybooks. He did not scoop her up or fill the silence with soft words. What he did was quieter and, in the end, larger. He gave her a room with a window that caught the morning. He put food in front of her 3 times a day and watched, with something close to satisfaction, when she finally ate without guarding her plate. And when he discovered that her Korean was a patchwork of playground scraps and half-heard television, he sat with her at the low table in his study every evening and corrected it, word by word, with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world and no intention of wasting a minute of it on her. That study became the center of her whole childhood. There was one rule inside it, and only one. Along the far wall stood an old wooden desk, and in that desk was a single locked drawer. And Naomi was allowed to touch everything in that house: the swords on the wall, the ledgers, the cold cups of tea he forgot to finish. Everything except that drawer. She asked about it once, early on. He looked at her, and he did not raise his voice. And he said only, "Not that. Never that." And in 15 years, she never opened it, because she loved him, and because some part of her understood that whatever was inside, it was the price of the peace they had built, and she was not willing to pay it just to know. His men adored her in their gruff way, and that created problems. By the time she was 10, Naomi had absorbed not only proper Korean, but the entire rich vocabulary of curses that hard men mutter over card games when they think no child is listening. She did not know they were curses. She thought they were ordinary words. And so one evening, at a formal dinner, with 3 of the city's most dangerous men seated stiffly around the table, the old man asked her to pass the soup, and Naomi passed it and thanked him, and added a phrase she had heard the driver use, a phrase so filthy that one lieutenant choked on his rice, and another had to leave the room to compose himself. The table went silent. Naomi, sensing she had done something remarkable, beamed. Seo Jung-ho set down his chopsticks. He looked at his men, grown killers, every one, now studying the ceiling and the floor and their own hands with tremendous interest. And then the most feared man in Seoul did the one thing his lieutenants had never seen him do. He put his face in his hand, and his shoulders shook, and it took Naomi a full minute to understand that the terrifying chairman of the organization was laughing, helplessly, until tears stood in his eyes. He made every man at that table apologize to her the next morning for their language. They did. They could barely look at her while they said it. Now, do not let me paint the old man as some gentle grandfather from a picture book, because he was not. He was a criminal, and the city knew it, and there were nights black cars came to the gate, and men spoke in the garden in voices meant for no one to hear. But a child does not judge a man by the whispers of a city. A child judges a man by whether he comes home, and whether he remembers, and whether he is there. And Seo Jung-ho was always there. He came to every recital, every single one. The clumsy piano, the school plays where she stood in the back row and forgot her one line. The graduation ceremonies stacked one on top of another as the years went by. He never sat up front where the other parents sat. He always took the very back row, near the door, and he always slipped out before the lights came up, so that no cameras would ever catch the most feared man in Seoul dabbing at his eyes over a little girl butchering a folk song. But he was there. She learned, without ever being told, to find the back row with her eyes before she found her mark on the stage. It was the first place she ever looked, and for 15 years it was never empty. There was one person in that world who never warmed to her, and Naomi felt it the way you feel a draft in a sealed room. Seo Kang-min was the old man's nephew, his blood, his late brother's son, the one everyone in the organization understood would inherit it all one day. He was a decade older than Naomi, handsome in an expensive, careful way, and he had grown up believing the place at the old man's right hand was his by birth. Then a foreign child had appeared in that house, and the old man had begun sitting at a low table every night, correcting her Korean, and slipping into the back row at her recitals. And something in Kangmin had gone quietly, permanently cold. He was never cruel to her where anyone could see. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at a stain on a wall he has been told he may not remove. On the rare evenings their visits overlapped, he would watch the old man's face soften toward her, and Naomi would catch, in the nephew's flat and patient eyes, something that frightened her more than any of the whispers in the garden. She did not have a word for it yet. She would find the word one day, in a courtroom. The word was hatred, and it had been waiting 15 years for its turn. There was the winter she came home from school in tears because a boy had said the thing children say, the thing about her skin, about where she came from, about how she did not belong. She would not tell the old man what had happened. She only cried at the low table until the ink ran on her homework. And Seo Jung-ho, who had ordered grown men to do terrible things without so much as raising his voice, sat down across from her and folded his hands and waited until she was done. Then he said something she carried for the rest of her life. "They will tell you that you do not belong here," he said. "They are wrong. You belong wherever you decide to stand, and you will learn to stand so straight that one day they will forget they ever doubted it." He paused, and then, because he was who he was, he added, "And if any of them ever puts a hand on you, you tell me his name, and I will handle the rest." She laughed through the tears. She couldn't help it, because she knew, even at 10 years old, that he absolutely meant it, and that somewhere in Seoul, a very unlucky fourth grader was one wrong move away from meeting the scariest man in the country. It was the first time she had laughed in months. He almost smiled. Almost. That was the thing about their life together. When she cried for her mother, and in the beginning she cried for her often, in the dark, so he would not hear. He never told her the comfortable lies that adults tell. He never said your mother will come back. He never said she loved you. He would come to her doorway, and he would stand there in the dark, and he would say the same strange sentence every time. "You were never left," he would say. "Whatever you believe, remember that. You were never left." And then, before she could ask what on earth he meant, because it made no sense, because she had read the file, because she had seen the word with her own eyes, he would change the subject, or turn off the hall light, or tell her to sleep. Not that. Never that. There were doors in that house that stayed locked, and it was not only the drawer. She kept her mother's book of fairy tales on the shelf above her bed, all through those years, its cloth-soft spine facing out. And on the hardest nights, she would take it down and run her thumb over the pages her mother's hands had once held, as if some warmth might still live in the paper. She could no longer remember her mother's face clearly. That was the cruelest theft of all, the way a face fades, even as you fight to hold it. But she remembered the voice that read those stories, low and certain. And she remembered a single sentence her mother used to say as she closed the book each night. "Somebody is always coming back for you, baby. Somebody is always coming back." Diane Johnson had said it 100 times, and then one gray afternoon she had not come back, and the sentence had curdled in Naomi's chest into the cruelest lie she knew. She never told the old man about the book, or the promise inside it, but more than once, passing her door long after midnight, he had seen the small light of it under the door, and stopped in the dark hallway, and stood there a while, and said nothing at all. Naomi grew. The paper bag disappeared from beside her bed, somewhere around her 12th year. Unpacked at last, though she could never say exactly when she had finally believed she was allowed to stay. She grew tall and sharp-tongued and impossible to argue with, and she poured every ounce of the ache inside her into a single, burning goal: to become the one thing a girl like her, in a place like that, was never supposed to become: respectable, untouchable, a woman whose name opened doors instead of closing them. She would be a lawyer. She decided it at 14 and never once wavered. Not because she loved the law, though she came to, but because the law was the opposite of everything that had happened to her mother. The law was written down. The law could not simply decide, one gray afternoon, that a person did not matter, and cross her out with a single flat sentence on a page. She would learn its language until she was fluent, until no one could ever again do to another frightened child what a stack of paperwork had nearly done to her. Law school nearly broke her. She worked while she studied, slept 4 hours, and turned down every offer of the old man's money, because taking it felt like admitting she needed him, and needing him felt like standing at the edge of a cliff she had spent her whole life backing away from. Because here was the truth she never said out loud, the wound underneath all of it. She loved him more than she had ever loved anyone, and she was terrified of it. Love, in her experience, was a loan, and the more you were given, the more it hurt when it was called back in. So she loved him at a careful distance. She moved out the week she passed the bar. She visited on holidays and left before dinner. She called him by his title, never anything warmer. And she told herself the wall she kept between them was maturity, when in truth it was the oldest fear she had, that if she ever let herself belong to him completely, she would only lose him too. What she wanted, underneath the degrees and the tailored suits and the careful distance, was so simple it embarrassed her. She wanted to be chosen on purpose, once, by someone who would not, in the end, walk away. She did not yet understand that she already had been, that the choosing had happened 15 years ago, in a cold office, by a man in a charcoal coat, and that he had paid a price for it she could not begin to imagine. She was 3 years into her career, a junior associate at a firm that had hired her partly for her mind and partly because a black woman's face in the lobby made the partners feel modern. When the phone rang at 11 o'clock on an ordinary Tuesday night, she almost did not answer. She was buried in someone else's contracts, and the number was not one she knew. But something, she would think about this later, the way a person thinks about the last ordinary minute before their life divides into before and after. Something made her pick it up. Attorney Johnson? The voice was male, clipped, careful. One of his men. She knew the cadence before she knew the face. You need to come. Tonight. What happened? Already she was standing. Already her heart was in her throat. Because men like that did not call at 11 at night to share good news. Is he hurt? Is he alive? He's alive. A pause. And in that pause she heard the whole world tilt. He's been arrested. Murder. The room went strange and far away. Murder. The old man had done many things in his long life. Things she had chosen for 15 years not to look at too closely. But this word, tonight, aimed at him. I'm coming, she said. Get him the best defense lawyer in the country. Tonight, right now. Whatever it costs, I don't care. Get anyone. That's the thing, Attorney Johnson. The man hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone quiet, almost afraid. He's refused them. He's refused all of them. He says he will not be represented by anyone else. What do you mean anyone else? She said. Anyone else but who? The man on the phone was quiet a moment too long. You, Attorney Johnson, he said. He'll accept no one but you. Those were his words. He said the only lawyer who will ever stand at his table is his daughter. Naomi did not move. Somewhere in the office, a printer hummed and fell silent. His daughter. In 15 years, he had never once said that word about her out loud. Not to her, not to anyone. There was no paper anywhere in Korea that used it. No adoption, no record, nothing but a locked drawer, and a back row, and a sentence in the dark that had never made sense. And now, facing the one charge that could end his life, with the full weight of a state that had hunted him for 40 years, finally closing around his throat, the old man had looked at every brilliant, expensive lawyer his empire could summon, and refused them all, and asked for a 23-year-old who had never defended a murder in her life. It was madness. It was a death sentence, dressed as a choice. If she stood at that table and lost, and she would lose, she was nobody. She was 3 years out of law school. He would die in a cell, and it would be her hands that had failed him. He knew that. He was the least foolish man she had ever known, which meant he had decided, somewhere behind that unreadable face, that he would rather stake his entire life on her than let a single competent stranger near his case. And standing in that empty office at 11 o'clock at night, the phone pressed white to her ear, Naomi understood one thing, with sudden, cold clarity. The old man was not trying to protect himself. He was protecting something else, something buried, something old, something he would rather die in prison than let a real lawyer uncover. The only question left was what? And Naomi already suspected, in the part of her mind that had spent 15 years learning not to ask, that the answer lived inside a locked drawer she had promised never to open. She did not sleep that night. She drove across the city in the dark, past the shuttered markets and the neon still burning over empty streets, to the detention center where they were holding him. And she sat in her car in the visitor's lot until the sky went gray, because she did not yet trust her own face to hold together in front of him. When the doors opened at last, she signed the register with a hand that would not stay still. The guard read her name, then read it again, and looked up at her with the particular curiosity of a man who has just realized who she is here to see. Half of Seoul knew the chairman had no children. All of Seoul was about to learn otherwise. They put her in a narrow room with a partition of scratched glass down the middle and a black telephone on the wall, and they told her to wait. She had been in rooms like this before, on the right side of the law, visiting clients who were guilty of ordinary, forgivable things. She had never once sat on this side of it for someone she loved. She folded her hands on the metal counter so they would stop shaking, and she waited. And then a door on the far side opened, and they brought him in. Seo Jung-ho in a detention uniform was a thing the human eye was not meant to accept. She had seen him in tailored charcoal his entire life, a man who made expensive rooms feel underdressed. Now he wore pale gray cotton, and his wrists were cuffed, and there was a bruise of exhaustion under each eye. And yet, this was the part that undid her. He walked to that chair, with exactly the same unhurried calm he had carried into the welfare office 15 years ago, as though the cell were merely one more room that would have to rearrange itself around him. He sat. He lifted the telephone. He looked at her through the scratched glass with an expression she could not read, and had never been able to read, and had spent her whole childhood trying to. "You came," he said. "Of course I came." Her voice cracked on came. She hated it. She was a professional. She had promised herself in the car that she would be a professional. "You have to stop this. Right now. You have to let me bring in real counsel. Kang Ji-won will take the case tonight if I ask him. He has never lost a murder trial. I am 3 years out of law school. I have never argued a homicide in my life. If you insist on me, you will be convicted, and you will die in a place like this. Do you understand what you are doing? I understand exactly what I am doing, he said. Then explain it to me. He was silent. Behind the glass his cuffed hands were still, and Naomi, who had come armed with every argument, felt them all slide off him like rain off stone. Why me? She said, quieter now. You could have anyone. Why would you gamble your life on the one person in Korea, guaranteed to lose it for you? For a long moment he only looked at her. Then he said, because there are things in my case that a real lawyer would go looking for, and a real lawyer would find them. You will defend me on what the prosecution shows you, and on nothing else. You will not go digging. You will not turn over stones. You will stand in that courtroom, and you will be brilliant. Because you are. And you will not ask the one question that would end me. He leaned a fraction closer to the glass. That is why it must be you. Because I am asking you not to look. And you are the only lawyer alive who might love me enough to obey. The room seemed to tilt. Look at what? She whispered. That, he said, is the thing you must not ask. And he set the telephone down against the counter, ending the conversation the way he ended all conversations he had decided were finished, completely and without appeal. She drove back across the city with her jaw clenched and her thoughts at war. She should walk away. Every rational cell in her body knew it. He was a criminal. He had just instructed his own lawyer to bury evidence. He was, in the plainest terms, telling her to help him hide something. Any court in the world would call that a reason to refuse. And yet she could not make the refusal come, because underneath the lawyer was the girl who had learned to find the back row before she found her mark. And that girl already knew she would walk into fire before she left him alone in that place. Her firm was less conflicted. She stood in the managing partner's office the next morning and watched his face go from confusion to alarm to something colder as she explained who her new client was. The chairman, he repeated. That chairman. Attorney Johnson, do you have any idea what representing that man does to this firm's name? He raised me, and she said. That is precisely the problem. He steepled his fingers. The prosecutor on this case is Yoon Sang-woo. Do you know who that is? He has spent 20 years trying to put your guardian behind bars. He does not lose cases he cares about, and he cares about this one more than any case of his life. You will not just lose, you will lose publicly, spectacularly, with your name and this firm's name stapled to the losing side. He softened, fractionally, the way men soften when they are about to be unkind for your own good. Refer it out. Let the professionals take the fall. Nobody expects a junior associate to defend a mob boss. He does, she said, and picked up her files, and walked out, and by lunchtime, she was, quietly, no longer entirely sure she still had a job to come back to. The arraignment was a circus. She had not understood, until she pushed through the courthouse doors, how much of the city had been waiting years for this exact morning. Cameras crowded the corridor. Reporters shouted his name, and then, when they saw the young black woman carrying his defense file, shouted hers. Who are you? What are you to him? Is it true he has no other lawyer? She kept her chin level and her eyes forward the way he had taught her at 10 years old. You will learn to stand so straight that one day they will forget they ever doubted it. And she said nothing, and she thought her heart might beat its way out of her chest. Inside, the charge was read aloud in the flat language of the state. Seo Jung-ho stood accused of the murder of a man named Han Tae-sok, 48, whose body had been found 3 weeks earlier. She wrote the name in her careful hand and did not yet feel it land, because it was only a name, a stranger, a problem to be solved. Across the aisle sat Prosecutor Yoon Sang-woo, gray-templed, unhurried, watching the old man with the patient hunger of a man who has finally cornered the thing he has chased his whole career. He did not gloat. That was what frightened her. He simply watched and waited, and she understood that this was a man who believed, all the way down, that he was about to do the most righteous work of his life. She got through it. She entered the plea. She requested discovery. And she was gathering her files at the defense table, hollowed out and shaking with adrenaline, when a voice spoke close behind her, low and pleasant and entirely without warmth. "You always were a determined little thing." She turned. Seo Kang-min stood there in a suit that cost more than her car, hands folded, smiling at her, with his mouth and nothing else. 15 years older than the last flat, patient look she remembered, and every bit as cold. "Kang-min," she said. "Attorney Johnson," he corrected gently, tasting the title as though it were faintly amusing. "Congratulations. Youngest counsel in the country to lose a capital case. They'll write about you." He stepped closer, dropping his voice so the departing reporters would not catch it. "I came to do you a kindness, since no one else will. Walk away from this. You are not equipped for it, and you are not wanted in it. Not by the court, and, if he had any sense left, not by him." "He asked for me," she said. "Yes." Something flickered behind Kang-min's eyes, quick and ugly. "He did, didn't he? Refused every man in the city and asked for the girl. 15 years, and he still cannot see straight where you are concerned." He tilted his head. "Has it never struck you as strange, Attorney Johnson? A man like that, careful with everything, careful to the point of paranoia. And in 15 years he never once signed a single paper making you his. No adoption, no guardianship on record, nothing that would hold up anywhere. You call him family. The law does not agree. Have you never wondered why?" She had. God help her, she had wondered it in the dark 1,000 times, and hearing it in Kang-min's smooth voice was like hearing her own worst thought read aloud by a stranger. "You don't know anything about it," she said. On the contrary, he buttoned his jacket, unhurried, a man who had said exactly what he came to say. "I know a great deal about how you came to be in that house. Far more than you do. That is rather the point." He smiled again, and this time, it reached almost to his eyes, which made it worse. "You think you know that old man, and you think you know yourself. You know neither. Ask him what he did the night you arrived, Attorney Johnson. Ask him, and watch his face. And when he lies to you, because he will, remember that I gave you the chance to walk away clean." He left her standing at the defense table in an emptying courtroom, and she found she could not move, because he had reached into the oldest wound she owned and pressed on it with one manicured finger, and she did not know how he had known exactly where it was. She threw herself into the work, because the work was the only ground that held. The discovery arrived in cardboard boxes, and she carried them home and spread them across her floor and did what she was good at. She read. She read the autopsy on Han Tae-sok. She read the crime scene reports, the phone records, the witness statements, the long paper trail the state had built to hang the man who had raised her. And she followed the prosecutor's own instruction, the one thing Yoon Sang-woo had done that she could actually use, which was to trace where Han Tae-sok had been in the weeks before he died, because a dead man's last movements are where a case is won or lost. Han Tae-sok, it turned out, had been asking questions. In the month before his death, he had visited 3 government offices and pulled a stack of old records, and someone at the prosecutor's office had helpfully logged which ones. Naomi ran her finger down the list at 2 in the morning, exhausted, half asleep, expecting nothing. Property deeds, business filings, the ordinary residue of an ordinary criminal's affairs. And then her finger stopped, because there, near the bottom of the list of files a dead man had pulled in the last weeks of his life, was a case number for a cold case 15 years old. A missing persons file. A woman who had vanished from Seoul and never been found, her disappearance logged and shelved and forgotten by everyone but the machine that keeps such numbers. The name on the file was Johnson. Diane. Naomi did not breathe. She read it again. She read it a third time, as though the letters might rearrange themselves into someone else's mother, some other abandoned family's grief. They did not. Her mother's name sat there in the state's own paperwork, threaded impossibly into the murder her guardian was accused of, pulled from a dusty archive by a man 3 weeks before someone put him in the ground. She sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by the boxes, her whole careful life gone suddenly weightless, and the questions came so fast she could not hold them. Why had Han Tae-sok been reading her mother's file? Why did a 15-year-old disappearance sit inside a fresh murder? What did the old man not want a real lawyer to find? And was this God? Was this it? Everything she believed about her own beginning, the flat sentence on the page, the mother who left and never came back. For the first time in her life it did not feel like fact. It felt like a story someone had told her. And she thought, with a cold that started in her chest and spread outward until her hands went numb, that the someone might have been the man she loved most in the world. She did not sleep. At dawn she was in her car. By the time the detention center opened, she was signing the register with a hand steadier than it had any right to be, because fury does what fear cannot. And by the time they brought him to the scratched glass, she had gone very quiet inside, the way she went quiet before she said the most important things. He sat. He lifted the phone. He looked at her, and whatever he saw in her face made him go still in a way she had never seen. "You went digging," he said softly. "I asked you not to. Han Tae-sok pulled my mother's file 3 weeks before he died." Her voice did not shake. That was how she knew how far past frightened she had gone. "Diane Johnson, my mother. Her missing persons case is sitting inside your murder charge. And you knew. You've known the whole time. That's what you didn't want me to find." The telephone was silent against her ear. Behind the glass the old man closed his eyes, and his cuffed hands, which had been perfectly still through everything, through the arrest, the arraignment, the ruin of his whole long life, began, very faintly, to tremble. "Look at me," she said. "Look at me and tell me, what did you do to my mother?" And Seo Jung-ho, the man half of Seoul still feared, the man who had walked into a locked room and rearranged the world around a frightened child, opened his eyes. And for the first time in 15 years, for the first time in her entire memory of him, the old man looked afraid. For a long moment, neither of them moved, and the only sound was the tinny hum of the telephone line between them. Then the old man mastered it, the fear, whatever it was, and pulled it back down beneath the surface the way he pulled everything down. And when he opened his mouth, his voice was steady again. And that steadiness was somehow worse than the trembling had been. "I did not kill your mother," he said. "Then what happened to her?" "I cannot tell you that." "Cannot or will not? They are the same word," he said. "When the truth is a knife pointed at the person holding it." He leaned toward the glass, and for one moment the mask slipped, and she saw underneath it something that looked almost like pleading, an expression she had never once seen on that face in 15 years. "Naomi, listen to me. There are 2 ways this ends. In one of them, I go to prison, and you go home, and you keep the life you built, and you keep believing whatever you need to believe about where you came from. In the other, You learn the truth, and it takes everything from you. The truth is not kind, child. It does not set you free. It only sets you on fire. I have spent 15 years keeping you out of that fire. Do not walk into it now to save me. I am not worth what it will cost you. That's my decision, she said. Not yours. It was always mine, he said quietly. From the first night. That was the whole point. And he set the telephone down, and this time, when he stood, the guard was already at his elbow, and he did not look back at her as they led him away. Because, she understood this later, he could not. She should have listened to him. The days that followed taught her exactly how right he had been about the fire. Prosecutor Yoon Sang-woo was a patient man, and patient men fight patient wars. He did not attack her in the courtroom. He attacked her in the newspapers, through channels that could never be traced to his office, and within a week, the story of Seo Jung-ho's trial had a second headline running beneath it. The mysterious foreign woman defending the crime lord, the orphan he had taken in, the puppet the old chairman had installed to run his defense from inside the walls. They put her face on the evening broadcasts beside grainy footage of black cars entering a Seongbuk-dong gate. They asked, with the wounded innocence of people asking the worst possible question, what kind of woman owes a mafia boss enough to stake her whole career on him? And let the viewer's imagination supply the ugliest answer. Before we continue, a quick note for everyone who loves these mafia boss romance stories. I've bundled 20 of our most loved Afro-Korean romance stories into the Ultimate Mafia Boss Love Collection. You'll get all 15 complete stories, 20 audiobook versions, plus 5 exclusive bonus stories you won't find on YouTube. If you'd love to enjoy these stories anytime without ads or interruptions, you'll find the link in the description below. Her firm suspended her on a Thursday. They used gentler words, administrative leave, pending review, in light of the reputational exposure, but she had read enough contracts to translate them. The managing partner would not meet her eyes. The colleagues who, a month before, had called her one of the good ones, the ones who had held her up in meetings as proof of how far the firm had come, now found urgent reasons to be looking at their phones when she passed. A woman she had considered a friend crossed to the other side of the corridor rather than share it with her, and did it so smoothly that a stranger would not have seen the cut in it. But Naomi saw it. Naomi had spent her whole life watching for exactly that motion, the small physical grammar of a person deciding you were no longer someone they could afford to know. Prosecutor Yoon made it official 3 days later. He filed a motion to have her removed as counsel. A conflict of interest, he argued, given her personal relationship to the defendant and her possible standing as a witness in matters connected to the case. It was clever, and it was cruel, and it forced her to stand in an open courtroom and argue, on the record, for her own right to defend the man who had raised her. She did it. Suspended, disgraced, sleepless, she stood at that podium with cameras drinking in every word, and made the argument of her life, that a defendant has the right to counsel of his choosing, that her relationship to him was precisely why he trusted her, that the prosecution's sudden concern for the fairness of her involvement was touching from an office that had leaked her face to every broadcast in the country. The judge denied the motion. She won. And walking out past the reporters afterward, she caught Yoon Sang-woo watching her with something that was almost respect, and it chilled her more than his contempt had, because it was the look of a man who had just measured his opponent and found her worth destroying properly. She went home to an apartment full of cardboard boxes and the wreckage of a murder case, and she sat on the floor among the files, and she was, in the most complete and literal way she had been since she was 8 years old, alone. Every fear she had ever swallowed had come true at once. She had let herself belong to someone, and it had cost her the respectable life she had bled for. And now she sat in the dark, surrounded by the paperwork of the very system she had trusted to protect her, watching it be used to destroy the only family she had. Love was alone. She had known it since she was a child, and here at last was the bill. There was one thing that kept her upright, and it embarrassed her how small it was. On the second night of her suspension, a knock came at her door, and when she opened it, there was no one there. Only a paper bag on the mat, still warm, and inside it a container of the specific spicy rice cake she had loved as a child, from the specific market stall near the Seongbuk-dong house, and a folded note in a blunt, unpracticed hand. The chairman said you forget to eat when you are angry. He is usually right. Driver park. She stood in the doorway holding the warm bag and laughed, and then found she was crying, because somewhere in a cell, the old man had used one of his few permitted phone calls, not on his defense, not on his freedom, but to make sure the girl who forgot to eat when she was angry did not forget to eat. She ate every bite. It was the first thing that had tasted like anything in a week, and then she made a decision that she knew, even as she made it, would either save him or destroy them both. If the truth was in a locked drawer, she would open the locked drawer. She still had a key to the Seongbuk-dong house. He had given it to her years ago, the way you give a key to family, and never asked for it back. She let herself in after midnight, when the men who watched the gate had thinned to one drowsy shadow she slipped past out of old habit, and she moved through the dark rooms of her own childhood like a thief. The house held its breath around her. She could have found the study blindfolded. She had done her homework at that low table for 10 years. She had learned Korean at it. She had cried at it over an ink-stained assignment, while the scariest man in Korea folded his hands and waited for her to finish. The desk stood where it had always stood, and the drawer, the one drawer, the single rule of her entire childhood, not that, never that, was locked, as it had been for 15 years. She found the key in the place he had always hidden things he did not truly wish to hide from her, taped beneath the lip of the desk, and her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to fit it. She thought, absurdly, of him saying her name in the dark. She thought of every night she had lain awake, wondering what was worth locking away in a house where nothing was ever locked. She turned the key. The drawer slid open, and what was inside it was not what she had spent 15 years imagining. There were no ledgers, no secrets of the organization, no evidence of the crimes the whole city whispered about. There was, instead, a single photograph, lying face down, exactly as her mind had refused to picture it. And beneath the photograph, a bundle of envelopes, tied with string, thick as a brick, soft at the corners from being handled. She turned the photograph over. Her mother looked back at her, Diane Johnson, young, laughing at whoever held the camera, her head thrown back, a hand raised as if to wave the lens away. Alive, so alive it stopped Naomi's heart. The face she had spent 15 years failing to remember, suddenly and completely restored to her in a single square of paper. And standing beside her mother, not touching her, but turned toward her, watching her laugh with an expression Naomi had seen exactly once before, in a welfare office, over a plastic chair, was a much younger Seo Jung-ho. They knew each other. Before the office, before the 4 words, before any of it. Her mother and the old man had known each other, and had stood together somewhere in the sun, and someone had thought the moment worth keeping, and he had hidden it in the one drawer she was forbidden to open, and he had kept it face down for 15 years because he could not bear to see it, and could not bear to lose it either. She sank to the floor of the study with the photograph in her hands, and then, Because her hands seemed to be moving without her, she pulled the string from the bundle of envelopes. They were letters, dozens of them, and every single one was addressed, in her mother's handwriting, to her. To Nayeli, on your 9th birthday. To Nayeli, on your 10th. To my Naomi, whatever they are calling you now. 15 years of birthdays and Christmases and ordinary Tuesdays, letters written to a daughter and never sent, and Naomi understood with a lurch that they had not been written by a woman who abandoned her child and walked away. You did not write to a child for 15 years if you had left her. You wrote to a child for 15 years if you had been taken from her. She could not read them in order. She grabbed the earliest one, the ink faded to brown, the paper worn thinnest of all, and she read it by the light of her phone on the floor of the room where she had grown up. And the story her whole life had been built on came apart in her hands, one sentence at a time. Her mother had not left willingly. Her mother had been running. There was a man. The letter did not name him, referred to him only as the one who is looking for me, in a hand that pressed so hard in places it tore the page. A man from the world Diane had come to Korea chasing. A dangerous man. A man to whom Diane had become a danger in turn, because of something she had seen, something she was not supposed to have seen. And with that man closing in, Diane Johnson had done the only thing a hunted mother can do. She had taken her daughter to the one person in the entire city she believed strong enough and stubborn enough to keep the child alive when she herself could not. I left you with the only man in Seoul I trust, the letter said. He owes me a debt he can never repay, and he is the kind of man who pays what he owes. He will protect you with his life. I am so sorry, baby. I am so sorry. Somebody is always coming back for you. Please believe I meant to be the somebody. She read another, and another, unable to stop. In them her mother came alive in pieces. Funny and frightened and fierce. A woman writing to a daughter she could not hold. Diane wrote about New York, about a stoop in Harlem where Naomi had taken her first steps, about the smell of her own mother's kitchen, small ordinary treasures she was trying to hand across the years to a child who might never receive them. And woven through all of it, again and again, was the old man. She wrote of him with a strange, aching gratitude that Naomi could not at first understand. He is not a good man, one letter said, and I will not pretend to you that he is. But once, a long time ago, before either of us was what we are now, he did something for me that no good man would have had the strength to do, and I did something for him in return, and that is a bond thicker than blood or law. He will keep you because he keeps his word, and because she had scratched something out here, hard so that Naomi could not read it, and because of what you are to him. Trust the drawer, baby. When you are old enough, and only then, make him show you the drawer. Everything I could not say is in the drawer. Naomi looked down at the open drawer she was sitting beside, the drawer she had been forbidden for 15 years, and understood that her mother had left her a map, and the old man had spent 15 years standing on it so she could not read it. Naomi was weeping now, silently, the way she had learned to weep as a child, so that no one would hear. She read the sentence again. Somebody is always coming back for you. Her mother's promise, the one that had curdled into the cruelest lie she knew, and it had not been a lie at all. It had been a woman trying to reach her daughter across an impossible distance, writing letters into the dark, that a man kept locked in a drawer because he could not send them and could not destroy them. You were never left. She heard the old man's voice in the dark hallways of her childhood, saying it and changing the subject. You were never left. It had never been comfort. It had been the truth, the whole time. Hidden in plain sight in 4 words, she had been too wounded to hear. She had not been abandoned. She had been hidden. By her mother, and then by him, and the file that said left her was the lie. And the old man had let her carry that lie for 15 years, rather than hand her the truth that came with it. Because the truth that came with it was what had happened to Diane after she wrote the last of these letters. Naomi reached for the final envelope with a dread she could feel in her teeth. It was the shortest. The handwriting was different, faster, jagged, frightened, the letters barely holding their shape. It had no birthday on it, no gentle greeting. It began mid-thought, as though Diane had been interrupted between one heartbeat and the next. He knows where I am. If anything happens to me, the truth is with, and there the sentence stopped. Not finished. Stopped. The ink trailed off the edge of the word, as though the pen had been pulled from the page. There was nothing after it. There would never be anything after it. Naomi stared at the broken sentence, at the place where her mother's voice simply ended, and she looked at the small date scratched in the corner of the page, and something cold walked up her spine. She knew that date. She had been reading it for weeks in a different set of documents. She had written it in her own careful hand at a defense table. It was 15 years old, and it was the last recorded day anyone in the city of Seoul had seen Diane Johnson alive. And it was the thread, she now understood, that a man named Han Tae-sok had started pulling 3 weeks before someone put him in the ground. Whatever her mother had seen, whatever truth was with, someone, Han Tae-sok had gone looking for it 15 years later. And Han Tae-sok was dead. And the man accused of killing him was the man in the photograph. The man who had kept these letters. The man who had promised a hunted woman he would protect her child with his life. She did not know yet what any of it meant. She only knew that the ground she had stood on her whole life was gone, and that she was standing over something far deeper and far darker, and that the old man had been right about the fire. She was still on the floor of the study when her phone rang. It was 6 in the morning. It was a junior colleague from the firm, one of the few who still spoke to her, and his voice was tight with the particular urgency of someone calling to warn a friend about a fire they can already see. Naomi, you need to see the news. Right now, the prosecution, they held a briefing an hour ago. Kang Min was there, standing right next to Prosecutor Yoon. She stood, the letters spilling from her lap. Kang Min was standing next to the prosecutor. He's cooperating. He's a state witness now, Naomi. And they're saying they have new evidence. A witness who places the chairman at a scene 15 years ago. They're not just trying him for the recent murder anymore. Her colleague's voice dropped. They're saying he killed a woman 15 years ago too. An American woman who went missing. And that this new victim, Han Tae-sok, found out about it. And that's why the chairman had him killed. 2 murders. They're building it as 2 murders, connected. I'm sorry. I know you two are. I just thought you should hear it from a friend before you saw the picture they're using. What picture? Naomi said, though she already knew, in the marrow of her, what picture. The missing woman, he said. The one they say he killed. They put her name up on the screen. A pause. Diane Johnson. Naomi. Isn't that? She hung up. She did not remember deciding to. She stood in the gray dawn light of the study of the house that had raised her, holding a bundle of her dead mother's unsent letters, and she understood that Kang Min had just handed the state a story so perfect it could only have been built by someone who knew exactly where every wound was buried. That the old man had not only failed to save Diane Johnson, but had murdered her, and had raised her orphan daughter as some monstrous act of penance or possession, and had now killed again to keep the secret. It was a story with a shape. It was a story a jury would believe. It fit every fact she had. and it curdled every good memory she owned into evidence of something unspeakable. And the terrible thing, the thing that broke something in her chest, that had held together since she was 8 years old, was that she could no longer prove it wasn't true. He had known her mother. He had hidden the letters. He had let her believe a lie for 15 years. He had told her, in his own words, through the glass, "Do not go looking. There are things a real lawyer would find." What if this was the thing? What if she had spent her whole life loving the man who took her mother from her? What if the hand that had pressed against the study window in her memory, the hand that had signed nothing, adopted nothing, explained nothing, was the hand that had? She could not finish the thought, but she could feel it finishing itself, in the dark, whether she permitted it or not. Every warm memory she owned turned its face toward her and became a question. The back row at every recital, the hand against the study window. She comes with me. Had it been love, or had it been a cage, built by a man who could not undo what he had done, and so had decided to keep the evidence of it, and raise it, and call it a daughter? She did not know. That was the horror of it, that after 15 years she suddenly did not know, and could not know, and might never know. She did the thing she had promised herself, at 8 years old, that she would never do to another living soul, because it had been done to her, and it was the worst thing in the world. She decided to leave him. She would withdraw from the case. She would let the professionals take it, the way the managing partner had begged her to. She would walk out of that detention center and out of his life and back toward whatever was left of hers. And she would let the man who might have killed her mother face the fire alone, the way he had let her face hers. It was justice. It was self-preservation. It was, she told herself on the long, silent drive across the city, the only sane thing left to do. She signed the register. She sat down at the scratched glass. When they brought him in, he looked older than he had 2 days before, grayer, and when he saw her face, swollen from crying, closed the way she closed it when she had decided something final, he went very still, because he had raised her, and he could read that face better than anyone alive. She did not pick up the telephone at first. Instead, she reached into her bag, and she took out the photograph, the one from the drawer. Her mother laughing beside a younger version of the man behind the glass. She pressed it flat against the partition, facing him, so that he had to look at it, so that he had to look at Diane Johnson alive and laughing in the sun. His face broke. She watched it happen. 15 years of the unreadable mask, gone in an instant, and behind it, something so raw, she had to force herself not to look away. She lowered the photograph. She picked up the telephone, and when she spoke, her voice was the quietest it had been in her whole life. Quiet the way the moment is quiet, before everything falls. "I found the letters," she said. "I found her. I know she didn't leave me. I know you hid me. I know all of it now, or almost all of it. And there is only one thing left I need you to say to me, and then I am going to walk out of here and let you face this alone. Because I cannot be the girl you raised if you are also the man who took her from me." She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass, the way he had once pressed his against a study window in the dark. "So look at me, and tell me you didn't kill her." The old man looked at the photograph. He looked at his daughter's hand against the glass. And Seo Jung-ho, who had kept the truth locked in a drawer for 15 years, rather than let it burn her, finally opened his mouth to speak the sentence he had sworn on a dying woman's letters he would never have to say. "I loved her," he said. It was not the sentence Naomi had braced for. It went through her like cold water, because it was true. She could hear that it was true, in a voice she had spent 15 years learning to read. And because it explained the photograph, and the drawer, and the letters he could neither send nor burn, and every locked door in the house of her childhood at once. A long time ago, before you were born, your mother did something for me, he said. I will not tell you what. It is mine to carry, and it does not matter now. But she saved my life when she had every reason to let me die. And a man like me does not forget a debt like that. When she came to Korea years later, chasing a foolish man and a fresh start, she found me again. And she found something else. His cuffed hands were flat on the counter now, very still. She found that the man she had chased was tangled up with my organization's money. And one night, in the wrong place, she saw one of my people do a terrible thing to protect that money. She saw a murder. Naomi. She saw who did it. And from that night, she was no longer a woman chasing a fresh start. She was a witness. And witnesses to that kind of thing do not grow old. Who? Naomi said. Her voice did not sound like her own. Who did she see? The man who is sitting beside the prosecutor, the old man said, wearing a suit I paid for. The room tilted. Kang Min, my brother's son, my blood, the one I was grooming to take everything, because he was clever and cold, and I mistook cold for strong, the way old men do. His jaw worked. Your mother saw him kill a man over money, and Kang Min knew she had seen, so he hunted her through this city like an animal. And your mother, your brave, terrified mother, did the only thing she could think to do. She ran to me. She put you in my arms. And she called in the debt she had held over me for 20 years. And she said, keep her alive when I cannot. And I swore it. On everything I have ever been, I swore it. His voice cracked. Once. And he mastered it. And then I failed the second half of the promise. I could hide you. I hid you so well that even the state believed she had abandoned you. But I could not hide her, because she would not stay hidden. She was gathering proof. She wanted him caught. She would not let it go. And one night before I could reach her, Kang Min found her first. Naomi could not breathe. He killed her. He killed her 15 years ago, Seo Jung-ho said. And I have known it every single day since. I have sat across dinner tables from the man who murdered the woman I loved, and I have called him nephew, and I have said nothing. Naomi thought of 100 small moments she had never understood. The way the old man's hand would come to rest on her shoulder whenever Kang Min entered a room, light as a warning. The year he had quietly sent her to study abroad the moment the nephew began rising in the organization, and brought her home only when he had gathered enough power to keep him at arm's length. She had thought it strange affection. It had been a bodyguard's vigilance, 15 years long, disguised as a grandfather's fussing. He had stood between her and her mother's killer at every dinner table of her childhood, and she had never once seen the wall, because he had built it out of himself. He leaned toward the glass, and now the tears came, and he did not fight them. You want to know why? I will tell you the truth, and you will hate me for it, and you will be right to. If I had moved against Kang Min then, accused my own successor of murdering an American witness, it would have split my organization down the middle. There would have been a war. And in a war, the first thing each side hunts for is the other side's leverage. And the only leverage anyone would have needed against me was a little brown-skinned girl in a house in Seongbuk-dong. He let that land. The safest place in the world for you was a lie. As long as everyone believed your mother had abandoned you and vanished, no one had any reason to look at you twice. The moment the truth came out, you became the loose end that got your mother killed. So I chose. I chose your life over her justice. I buried what he did. I made the file say she left the country. And I raised her daughter in the one house in Seoul he could not enter without my leave. and I waited for the day I was strong enough to take him down without the fallout reaching you. That day never came. I got old first. You were never left, Naomi whispered. She was weeping now, openly, the way she had never let herself weep in front of him in 15 years. That's what you meant. Every time. You were never left. You were hidden, he said gently, by her, and then by me. Because I could not save your mother, Naomi, but I could save you. And I would do it again. The lie, the silence, all of it. I would do every part of it again, 1,000 times, to sit in this cell and know that you grew up, and became who you are, and are alive to hate me for it. And Han Tae-sok, she managed. The man you're accused of killing? The old man's face went grim. Han Tae-sok was an investigator your mother trusted. Back then, one of the people she was feeding proof to before she died. He went quiet for 15 years. Frightened, I always assumed. But 3 weeks ago he started pulling her file again. He was close. He was very close to proving what Kang Min did. And Kang Min could not have that. Not now. Not when I am old and the empire is nearly his. He looked at her steadily. So Kang Min killed him. And then he did the cleverest thing that Cold Mind has ever done. He framed it on me, and turned witness, so that in one stroke he silences the past, inherits everything, and puts the old man away forever. He does not just want me convicted, Naomi. He needs me convicted. Because the day I die in a cell is the day the last person alive who knows what he did is gone. Naomi sat very still with her palm against the glass, and inside her something enormous was rearranging itself, the way the room had rearranged itself around a man in a charcoal coat 15 years before. Every memory she owned was turning over and showing its true face. The back row at every recital. A man who had given up justice for the woman he loved so that this exact girl could stand on this exact stage. The 4 words in the welfare office, not pity, not penance, but a promise to a dying woman, being kept. She had spent 23 years believing she was the most easily abandoned person in the world, the leftover, the lone that got called in. And the truth was the exact and total opposite. She was the most fiercely protected person in the entire city. She had been chosen, on purpose, at terrible cost, by a man who gave up his freedom and his vengeance and the love of his life to keep her breathing, and who had never once told her, so that she would never have to carry the weight of what her safety had cost. The girl who was sure she was leavable had been, the whole time, the one thing a hunted mother and a hardened criminal had agreed was worth any price on earth to keep. She broke. She pressed both hands against the glass and sobbed, and on the other side the old man lifted his cuffed hands as high as the chain would let them, and pressed his palm against hers through the partition, and for a long moment the two of them simply stayed like that, a father and a daughter separated by a 1/4 inch of scratched acrylic and 15 years of a beautiful, terrible lie. If you believe some families are chosen and not born, if you have ever been kept by someone who owed you nothing, type chosen in the comments and stay with me. Because Naomi still has to walk back into that courtroom and prove it. She did not sleep that night either. But this time, it was not despair that kept her up. It was the letters. The truth is with, and there the last one had stopped. She had read it as the end of a life, a sentence cut off by a killer's hand. But she read it differently now, because now she knew her mother had not been a woman who simply vanished mid-word. Diane Johnson had been gathering proof. Diane Johnson had been the kind of woman who wrote to her daughter for 15 years into the dark. A woman like that did not leave a sentence unfinished. A woman like that hid the rest of it. Naomi sat on her floor at 3 in the morning and held the last letter up to the light. and she saw what 15 years of handling had disguised. That it was not one page but two, worn so soft they had fused at the edges, stuck together like a secret keeping itself. She worked them apart with the patience her whole childhood had taught her. Breath held, and the sentence that had ended in the dark continued onto the second page in her mother's fast, frightened hand. The truth is, with the debt I am owed, ask him for the drawer. But if he is gone, or if he cannot, then know this, and take it to anyone who will listen. The man hunting me is Seo Kang-min. I saw him put a bullet in a man named Cho over the Namgu accounts on the 3rd of the month in the warehouse by the water. He does not know I kept a copy of what I saw. It is behind the loose brick, 3rd from the floor, in the wall of that warehouse, where he will never think to look, because he does not believe a frightened woman is brave. He is wrong. Naomi, baby, be brave. Be braver than they think you are. Naomi lowered the letter. Her hands were steady. Somewhere across the city, in a wall by the water, behind a loose brick her mother had described 15 years ago, there might still be the one thing Kang-min was certain had died with Diane Johnson. The proof, in a witness's own hand, dated and detailed, of the murder that had started all of it. A document he did not know survived. A document he had killed twice to keep buried, not knowing it had been waiting in a wall the whole time for the frightened woman's brave daughter to come and find it. The old man had told her not to go looking. She went looking. The warehouse still stood by the water, in Namgu, half forgotten, its windows blind with grime, the kind of building a city keeps meaning to tear down, and never does. Naomi went at dusk, alone, because she did not trust anyone else with what might or might not be waiting there. And she stood in the cold, gutted dark where a man named Cho had died 15 years before, and where her mother had crouched in the shadows and watched it happen. She counted up from the floor. 1st brick, 2nd, 3rd, and she pressed her fingers against the mortar, and the 3rd brick shifted, loose, exactly as a frightened woman had promised in a letter no one was ever supposed to read. Her heart was slamming as she worked it free. For a moment there was only a black hole in the wall, and the sick certainty that 15 years of damp had rotted whatever her mother had hidden into pulp. Then her fingers touched oilcloth. A packet, wrapped and rewrapped against the weather by hands that had known they might not live to come back for it, sealed and waiting in the dark all this time. Because a hunted woman had been braver than her killer ever believed a frightened woman could be. Naomi drew it out into the last of the light, and she did not open it there. She held it against her chest, in the place where her mother had died trying to be believed, and she made her a promise of her own. What that packet contained, and what Naomi did with it, is the reason people in Seoul still talk about the trial of Seo Jung-ho. She walked back into that courtroom a different woman than the one who had frozen at the defense table. The cameras were there. The whispers were there. Prosecutor Yoon Sang-woo was there, patient and certain, his case a perfect machine. And at the state's table sat Seo Kang-min in his expensive suit, the cooperating witness, the grieving nephew, ready to deliver the testimony that would bury his uncle for 2 murders. He watched Naomi take her seat, and he permitted himself the smallest smile, because he had measured her too, and found her small. She let the prosecution build its whole beautiful house. She let Yoon walk Kang-min through his story, the chairman's violence, the old woman 15 years gone, poor Han Tae-suk who learned too much. She let the jury lean in. And then it was her turn to cross-examine the state's own witness, and Naomi Johnson rose and buttoned her jacket the way she had watched him do 1,000 times, and stood so straight that somewhere a boy from the 4th grade would have forgotten he ever doubted her. She was gentle at first. She let Kang-min relax. She asked him about the family, about the house, about how well he had known the old man's ward. And then, quietly, she asked him where he had been on the 3rd of the month, 15 years ago, at a warehouse by the water in Namgu. The smile left his face by degrees. "I don't recall," he said. "No," Naomi said. "I imagine you have tried very hard not to." She let the silence stretch. "Let me help. You were at a warehouse in Namgu, over the accounts, with a man named Cho." "You're guessing," Kang Min said, but a muscle had gone tight at the corner of his jaw. "You have nothing. Whatever you think you know died with—" He stopped. The whole courtroom heard the shape of the sentence he did not finish. "Died with her." Naomi let it hang in the air a moment, so the jury could hear it too. "Finish the thought," she said quietly. "Died with whom?" He said nothing. So she asked the court's permission to enter into evidence a letter 15 years old, written by the missing woman herself, in her own authenticated hand, on the last night of her life. She watched Kang Min's certainty curdle into something else as she read her mother's words into the record. The 3rd of the month, the warehouse by the water, a bullet, and a man named Cho, and the name of the man who fired it. And then she told the court where Diane Johnson had said her proof would be found, a loose brick, 3rd from the floor, and entered the second exhibit, a sealed oilcloth packet that the Seoul police, acting on a defense filing 48 hours earlier, had recovered from behind that exact brick 2 days before. Inside it, preserved through 15 winters, were the photographs and the ledger pages a frightened woman had hidden in a wall before she was murdered to keep her silent. Proof, in dead Diane Johnson's own hand, of the crime Seo Kang-min had spent his whole life certain no one had survived to tell. The courtroom did not erupt. It went silent. The specific, total silence of dozens of people watching a perfect machine tear itself apart. Prosecutor Yoon Sang-woo sat very slowly back in his chair, and on his gray, honest face was the expression of a man who has spent 20 years hunting a monster and just realized, in open court, that he had been handed the wrong one. He did not fight her after that. That was the measure of the man. When he saw the truth, he wanted it more than he wanted to win. He turned, with cold and beautiful precision, and began, as the state, to dismantle his own witness. Kang Min broke on the stand the way cold things break, all at once and along a hidden flaw. He had planned for the old man's silence. He had planned for a green girl who would freeze. He had not, in 15 years, ever once planned for a dead woman to reach up out of a wall by the water and name him. By the time Naomi sat down, the man who had murdered her mother and murdered Han Tae-sok and tried to send the man who raised her to die in a cell for both was being read his rights at the same table where he had come to watch his inheritance delivered. Seo Jung-ho was acquitted of all charges 9 days later. Kang Min was led out of that same courthouse in the handcuffs that had been meant for his uncle, and he did not look cold anymore. He looked like a man who had finally been seen. In the corridor afterward, Prosecutor Yoon Sang-woo stopped her. 20 years he had hunted the old man, and here was the girl who had beaten him. And for a moment Naomi braced for whatever a proud man says when he loses. But Yoon only studied her, and then inclined his head, the smallest bow. "Your mother," he said, "would be proud of the lawyer she made." And he walked away, and she understood he had meant it as the highest thing he knew how to give. Because to a man like Yoon, the truth mattered more than the win, and she had handed him the truth. Down the hall, Driver Park was waiting by the doors with the old man's charcoal overcoat folded over his arm, ready, the way he had been ready for 15 years. And when he saw Naomi coming, he did something none of the old man's men had ever done in front of her. He bowed to her the way they bowed to the chairman. Outside, on the courthouse steps, in the flat winter light, the old man walked free for the first time in months, and there were no cameras close enough to hear what happened next, which is the only reason it happened at all. Naomi stood in front of him. 15 years of careful distance stood between them. The title she used instead of a warmer word, the wall she had built out of the oldest fear she owned. And she took it down, all of it, in the space of one breath, and she said the word she had never once allowed herself to say in her entire life. Appa, father. The old man's composure, the thing that had survived the arrest and the trial and the ruin of everything he had built, did not survive that. His face crumpled, and Naomi, who had spent 23 years believing love was a loan that got called in, finally asked him the only question that had ever really mattered. The one underneath the case, and the letters, and the drawer, and all of it. Why me? She said. Out of everyone, why did you choose me? And Seo Jung-ho looked at the daughter he had never adopted on paper, the daughter he had lied to for 15 years to keep her alive, the daughter who had walked into the fire he begged her to avoid and pulled him out of it, and he gave her the answer she had been waiting her whole life to hear. I did not choose you because I owed your mother, he said. That is why I came to the office. It is not why I stayed. I stayed because somewhere in the first year, you stopped being a promise I was keeping, and became my daughter. And a man does not need a reason to love his daughter. And a man does not need paper to have one. He put his old hand against her face, the way he never had, all those years, because he had not believed he had the right. I chose you that first night, and I chose you every night after, and if I had to walk into that office 1,000 times, in 1,000 lives, I would choose you in every single one. You lied to me, she said. But there was no anger left in it, only wonder. For 15 years, I did, he said, and it is the only thing I have ever done that I would not undo. Because a lie that lets a child sleep is worth more than a truth that gets her killed. You can hate me for it. I have made peace with that. I would rather have you alive and hating me than at peace and gone. He wiped her tears with his thumb, clumsy, out of practice, a man learning at 70 how to do the thing he had denied himself for 15 years. You called me Appa, he said. I waited a long time to hear that. I would have waited 100 years. She wept, and this time he held her, out on the courthouse steps in the cold, a hardened old criminal, and the abandoned girl who was never, it turned out, abandoned at all, only hidden, and kept, and chosen, by two people who loved her enough to let her think she was leavable, rather than let her carry the weight of how fiercely she was not. Here is the thing Naomi understood, standing there, that took her 23 years and a murder trial to learn, and that maybe you already know, or maybe you needed to hear tonight the way she did. Blood makes a relative. Showing up makes a parent. And no one on this earth is unlovable. There are only people who were claimed by the wrong hands, and people still waiting to be claimed by the right ones. Diane Johnson had it right in the dark, 15 years ago, in a sentence her daughter finally got to read. Somebody is always coming back for you. It is the truest thing there is. Sometimes the somebody is not who you expected. Sometimes the somebody is a stranger in a charcoal coat who says 4 words in a cold room and then spends the rest of his life quietly proving he meant them. And sometimes, the part nobody warns you about, the somebody who was supposed to save you turns out to be the one you have to save right back. If you enjoyed this story, imagine having 20 more unforgettable Mafia Boss romances ready to read or listen to whenever you want. That's exactly why I created the Ultimate Mafia Boss Love Collection. Inside, you'll find 15 complete stories, 20 audiobook versions, and 5 exclusive bonus stories that aren't available on YouTube. You can get instant access through the link in the description. If you have ever been chosen by someone who owed you nothing, do me one kindness before you go. Subscribe and stay with us, because there is another story waiting, and it might just be the one you needed to hear. Thank you for staying to the very end, besties. We'll see you in the next one.